Welcome back. The Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises. Dan Wetzel will be along at 12:30 Eastern. We will talk with Dan about, this is a playoff show. This is kind of a playoff show. I will tell you on Wednesday, Bill and I and a special guest will make our playoff picks. So that's when we'll tell you like who we think is going to make the playoff. But we got to lay the groundwork for the playoff here because the first college football playoff selection committee rankings come out a week from today. And we want to tell you like the lay of the land before we get to next Tuesday, because I think there's something else going on next Tuesday that might be on your mind. So Dan and I are going to talk about like, is this the best way to pick a playoff? Is the committee under pressure from the SEC and Big Ten? Do we trust the committee? It's kind of the main thing. But for the first half hour here, I want to lay out like who's in the race. And I have the 10 most important remaining games in this regular season that will affect the playoff race, like barring upsets. And there's going to be upsets. Like, there's only 10 games remaining in the regular season between ranked teams. Teams currently in the AP top 25. There are only 10 more games where those teams are playing each other. That's not a ton. So those are my 10 big games. Now, you anticipate upsets that are going to shake up the playoff race because they almost always happen. But then there are times when you're like, there's going to be an upset. Don't worry, there's going to be an upset. And then they don't come. So there are a couple teams here that really have playoff paths that is just reasonably handle your business in November and you're in. So we just want to get all of that laid out. And we're going to start with how many teams we think are in the playoff race right now. And that number to me is 29. That's 29 out of 134 teams in the FBS can control their destiny is a little tough, but it's close to controlling your destiny. I don't have any 3-loss teams in this group right now. If you are a 3-loss team who wins out and gets help and has some crazy stuff happen and then like springs a really big upset along the way, maybe you've got an outside shot. I initially thought like going into a 12-team playoff year that a good blue blood, that helps. We know it helps. 3-loss team would be right in the thick of the playoff mix. I'm not sure that's true this year because I think there's going to be a lot of 10-2 teams. There are going to be, I think, some 10-2 power conference teams with pretty decent resumes, maybe who don't get in if things don't go nuts. So the 29 teams that I think are in, that's in the race. That's 22 in the Power 4. It's 7 G5 teams. In the Power 4, it's 11 Northern teams, 10 Southern teams, and 1 border team. In the G5, it's 4 Northern teams, 2 Southern teams, and 1 border team. Overall, 15 Northern teams of our think about that. 15 of our 28 are in the playoff race right now. That's more than half as we enter November. That's awesome. 12 Southern teams, 2 border teams. That's the 29 total in the race. And let's run through it like this. In the ACC, the 4 teams in the race, in my mind, are Clemson, Miami, SMU, and Pitt. That is undefeated Miami, and we'll get to them in a second. They really have a path. I still am not all the way in on Miami, but these are the teams that have 0 or 1 loss. This is undefeated Miami, undefeated Pitt, 7-1 SMU, 6-1 Clemson. Syracuse and Duke both have 2 losses. And like, again, if Syracuse has a chance against Miami, Duke plays Miami this week. If they beat Miami and then run it otherwise, maybe they can backdoor into the ACC championship game. I don't know, but that would take a lot. So I don't have them like in the race. They're at the edge. The 4 ACC are Clemson, Miami, SMU, and Pitt. In the Big 12, the North is dominating. It's 4 Northern teams that are in the playoff race in the Big 12. It's undefeated BYU. It's undefeated Iowa State. It's 1-loss Kansas State, who has only lost to BYU. And it's 2-loss Colorado. Arizona State also has 2 losses, but they're two. I don't want to have to pretend about Arizona State. Plus, they have 2 conference losses. Colorado only has 1. Everybody else in the Big 12 has at least 3 losses. So I think those are the 4 teams that are in the playoff race. And I do think that the Big 12 has a very good chance at getting 2 teams into the playoff. And get back to me about 3 Big 12 teams in the playoff. I don't think the powers that be would let it happen. I don't think the perception in that room, and Dan and I are going to run through who the 13 people are in that committee room. I don't think they could open their mind. I could. I don't think I'm very open-minded. I don't think they could get there. You know what? What if we had 3 Big 12 teams and 3 SEC teams in the 12-team playoff? That seems normal. I would tell them that's normal. Put me in the room. I would tell them you could make a case that makes total sense, depending how this shakes down. But I don't think they would get there. But I think 2 for the Big 12 is very, very possible. I would even call it likely. Big 10, 5 teams. And it is 5, not 4. But it is like we've talked about this idea of like the search kind of for that next Big 10 team. Oregon undefeated, Penn State undefeated, Indiana undefeated, Ohio State with a 1-point loss at Oregon. Oregon has a path that's there for them. Ohio State plays Indiana and Penn State. Penn State and Indiana don't play each other. Illinois is lurking. This is the path for, this is a 10-2 Illinois argument. 10-2 Illinois with 2 losses at Oregon and at Penn State. Would that be enough? If there's chaos elsewhere and you're searching, it could be. I think it's not impossible. So I thought it was worth putting them in there. They have to win out, obviously, but I think they could win out. And then we'll see. Notre Dame's in there as an independent. I don't want to do the SEC, so I'll do that less. The G5 teams, Boise State's in the driver's seat. Boise State has beaten UNLV and Washington State, who are both in the mix. Navy just got blown out by Notre Dame. I have Memphis and Louisiana in there just because I don't know why. If Army beats Notre Dame, if Army stays undefeated with the win over Notre Dame, I think they're the team. So if they don't do that, if Army loses to Notre Dame, then Boise State's in the driver's seat going into the Mountain West Championship game. So those are the 7 teams to me in the G5. And there's too many. This is where I'm getting very concerned, and Dan and I will talk about this. I think mediocrity in the SEC could... take your blood pressure medication, Doug, could benefit the SEC because everybody's beating each other and the frauds are frauding each other. You get frauded up, you get frauded down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 SEC teams still in the playoff race. They will beat up each other. We're going to have a fraud eliminator here on Saturday. But I don't, it's not Saturday, it's in 2 weeks. I don't even like acknowledging this, but I feel like I have to acknowledge it. That Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Texas A&M, LSU, Alabama, Missouri, and Ole Miss are in the mix. Now, I do think LSU, Alabama, Missouri, and Ole Miss are like on the border of falling off, and they're going to have to upset somebody along the way to get somebody's attention. Ole Miss is going to have to beat Georgia, or LSU and Bama are going to play each other. Missouri's probably dead. I don't even know if Missouri wins out, if they would get in. So those are the 22 power conference. We have 7 G5. So that's, as you think about, I think that's pretty good. Like what I think this has worked. The idea that we can be talking about Colorado still in the playoff race, and we be talking about Illinois still in the playoff race, and we can be talking about, hey, Ole Miss is still in the playoff race, even though they stink and they haven't beaten anybody. Yay for college football. I do think it's good. And the idea that we have not had individual losses where Kansas State goes and gets blitzed at BYU and they're done, where Ohio State loses at Oregon and they're done, right? I don't think we should live in that world. Even where Texas A&M loses to Notre Dame in the opener and they're done. I don't think we should have September eliminator games in college football. So we haven't. So these are the 29 teams that are in it. Let's now talk about the teams. These are the top 25 teams in the top 25 of the rankings that do not play another ranked team in the rest of the regular season. So this is really like, this is your almost certainly going to be favored in all of your remaining games. And the teams, there's a bunch at the bottom here that don't matter that much, but there are 3 that really matter here. And the first is Oregon. Oregon has a tremendous win against Ohio State, They have a win over Boise that was also super tight. Both those wins are super tight, but they're against very good teams. That Boise win's really going to hold up, I think, in the end. It's going to be more of a positive than like, what were you doing there? Because I think Boise, my guess would be Boise's the playoff team. So that's a win over a playoff team. Oregon is at Michigan, home against Maryland, at Wisconsin, home against Washington. No ranked teams the rest of the regular season. That's an undefeated path to the Big Ten championship game, I think. I don't know that anybody would disagree with that. It's not impossible. I've kind of been on alert for one of these road trips to the Midwest to jump up and get them, but I don't know that Michigan is prepared to do that, and I don't know that Wisconsin is prepared to do that. Now, you get a rivalry game against a Washington team that has played better than its record, that is probably more talented than its results. They get it all together for a rivalry game after beating Oregon twice last year, maybe. But Oregon's going to be favored at home by 17 in that game. So Oregon does not play a currently ranked team the rest of the regular season. Miami's a fraud. They probably should have 2 losses. I don't want to say fraud. I'm not worried about Miami. Miami is not a national title contender to me. They have Duke this week. I actually be on alert for that. But that's the toughest game left, probably. At Georgia Tech, home against Wake Forest, at Syracuse. So go Qs. Let's see if Syracuse can do something. And then we enter a world. I don't think it would get to a situation where enough other crazy stuff would happen in the ACC that Syracuse beating Miami would somehow get Syracuse into the ACC title game. But the best of Syracuse can compete with Miami at home. I don't know that it can beat Miami. But we just are coming off a game where we saw sort of the worst of Syracuse, although they played pretty well defensively. So but Miami, not a ranked team, mostly because the ACC is not, they don't play Pitt. Miami doesn't play Pitt. That's the thing. BYU is the other one that really matters. We've been talking about it. They've handled their business in such an impressive way so far. And it looked like in the preseason, this is going to be a schedule. And then the other teams have fallen off. Their 4 remaining games at Utah. Utah was the preseason favorite. That's a rivalry game, the Holy War. It's on the road for BYU, but Utah's in shambles. Home against Kansas. Kansas was picked 4th in the Big 12. Kansas is kind of a mess. Now, they competed with Kansas State. They probably played their best game. They were in such a pit, they're ascending. So beating Houston and taking Kansas State to the wire in its last 2 games, that's the best we've seen of Kansas. So maybe Kansas can challenge BYU in that game at Arizona State and then Houston. So those are no ranked games for BYU, and those are the 3 that really matter. The rest are not surprising. Boise State doesn't have a ranked game. They've already beaten Washington State. They've already beaten UNLV, and they took Oregon down to the wire. So San Diego State, Nevada, at San Jose State, at Wyoming, Oregon State. That's probably a schedule they should be able to handle. Then Washington State's in there, but Colorado and Illinois are the lurkers. Missouri, I really maybe shouldn't have put in here. Missouri has shown nothing. Colorado and Illinois are the lurkers. And I think Illinois is the lurkiest because they are not going to make the Big Ten championship game. Colorado, if it wins out, could make the Big 12 championship game. And then that actually means they have a better chance. They're not lurking anymore. They're right in the thick of it. So Illinois with Minnesota, Michigan State, at Rutgers, and at Northwestern at Wrigley Field to end the season. I actually think Minnesota, Illinois this week is a really good game. I actually think I might pick Minnesota in that game, the way Minnesota's been playing. So that's not a gimme by any stretch. And Michigan State, ascending Michigan State with Aiden Childs figuring it out, that's not a gimme, even though Michigan State just lost to Michigan. So they're not gimmies, but they're very winnable. 10-2 Illinois is the team where if there is not an apparent 11 seed, if the committee's in there saying, man, this is hard, and Illinois is 10-2, I think they're in. So to think about that, and maybe that would make you angry and say that's not a playoff team. They don't deserve to be there. But what is that? I don't even know what that means anymore. If you have 10 wins and you lost to 2 playoff teams and that's it, and otherwise you did everything you're supposed to do, and you earned the right to go play on the road at the 6th seed, I actually think that's pretty cool. So Illinois is going to lurk. Colorado, if they win out and get a little help, they could be in the Big 12 title game. So watch Colorado and Illinois, again, just because they have winnable games there. All right, those are the teams in the top 25 that don't play other top 25 teams between now and the end of the regular season. Let's go now to, these are my 10 through 1 most important games for the rest of the regular season. And number 10 is a fraud eliminator between Alabama and LSU. Alabama in the AP poll is currently 14. LSU is 16. This is a game on November 9th at LSU. The loser's out. Thank goodness. Now, the problem is that the winner's going to be, oh, what a win. The winner's going to be elevated. So I guess I'm rooting against Alabama because on our KOTN list of how we root for Southern things in the North, root against Alabama is number 4 on that list. There is not a root against LSU, but like root for Brian Kelly to get his comeuppance maybe would be on there. To root for chaos is on there. So I do think just like this powerhouse to like dismantle the powerhouse, but also like my preseason wild prediction of Alabama beats Georgia and misses the playoff. I wouldn't be mad if that came true, just because, you know, Doug likes to look out for himself. So number 10 is that. I'm not saying you have to pay attention to this. I'm saying like off your radar over here in your peripheral vision as you're watching games that actually matter much more to you in the North. In your peripheral vision, just be aware of who that loser is and then ignore them for the rest of the year. And the winners, like, they're going to backdoor into the playoff. I get it. Number 9 is another SEC game. Guess what? It's like I have to acknowledge the SEC games exist. I'm not going to put them real high on the list. There's one that's actually pretty high. This is number 2, Georgia at number 19, Ole Miss, also on November 9th. This, again, is like root against Georgia, root for chaos. I just think Ole Miss is such a fraud. If Ole Miss loses this, the reason it's on here, if Ole Miss loses it, Ole Miss is absolutely done. So we can be done with them. So we win. I haven't gotten the sword out lately. We win either way when Georgia and Ole Miss play. Because either Georgia will vanquish the fraud once and for all, or Georgia will lose. And then my bet about Georgia going 10-2 or worse will be correct. And then we also throw, so Georgia, rooting against Georgia, that's part of what we do at KOTN. And then also we would throw the South into chaos if Georgia loses to Ole Miss. So let them deal with that. Let's just think of it as like we win either way because somebody's going to lose there. That's game number 9. Game number 8 is coming up right now this weekend. This is number 18 Pitt at number 20 SMU. This is, I don't want to say an eliminator, especially that I don't think it's a world where Pitt is undefeated. And if it loses one conference game, like its playoff hopes are over. But SMU is 4-0 in the ACC. Pitt is 3-0. And Clemson and Miami are also undefeated. So if the loser of this is now going to need help because the winner's going to be undefeated in conference play, and now you're looking for Clemson and Miami to get a loss somewhere. And if it, or SMU or Pitt to also, so you're like, you need help. The loser really needs help here. SMU is 7-1 with the only loss to BYU. So this really matters. Again, I don't think it's quite an eliminator, but man, the winner is in really good shape in the ACC race. And the loser really needs help. So it is a very major game, and it is a huge test for Pitt. And Eli Holstein got hurt at the end of the Syracuse game. Now that's a 10-day recovery period. After that game, Pat Narduzzi, the Pitt head coach, was saying like, oh, I think Eli Holstein got some stuff in his eyes and that was it. But it was on a run and he got tackled, and it appeared to me, and we were live at the game, that he did hit his head on the turf. And so Pat Narduzzi on Monday just like was not going to talk very specifically about injuries, but it is not a sure thing that Eli Holstein is going to play on Saturday. So Nate Yarnell, who was expected to be the starter this year before Eli Holstein won that job in August camp, would play if Eli Holstein can't go. Again, the offense has not been great lately. Eli Holstein has been making some risky plays. Nate Yarnell is a guy who has played for Pitt. You still have Des Reed. You still have Konate Mumfield. You still have Poppy Williams. You still have Gavin Bartholomew. I think Pitt's offense could still operate. Now, Eli Holstein's running ability is a huge factor there. And SMU was in and out with the quarterbacks at the beginning of the year. They've settled that down, and that's why they've been playing better. So much like Penn State, you're better if your starting quarterback plays. Drew Aller and Eli Holstein are similar that way. I do not think your chances are over if your starter cannot play. And if you're playing Bo Pribula, if you're Penn State, or you're playing Nate Yarnell if you're Pitt. So that is that situation. That is a super important game. It's number 8 on our list. Number 7 is number 21 Army at number 8 Notre Dame on November 23rd. And the reason this really matters is everyone, I think, probably agrees that 10-2 Notre Dame is not going to get in the playoff. 11-1 Notre Dame is going to get in the playoff. This is the only other ranked team that Notre Dame has left. What a world where Notre Dame has Florida State and USC left on its schedule, but the only ranked team left on its schedule is a service academy, and they're coming off a win over another service academy against Navy on Saturday. And this really sets up Army now, because this would not affect Army's chances of winning the American Athletic Conference, but it affects the chances of, if you win the American, are you the playoff team from the group of 5? If you are undefeated and have a win over Notre Dame, I think the answer is yes. If you are 11-1 and you lost to Notre Dame, but you're the American champ, I think the answer is no if Boise State is the Mountain West champ. So it really matters for Army. It's not a win and you're in the playoff for Army. It is almost certainly a lose and you're out. And I think it's a lose and you're out for Notre Dame. And I'm going to be very curious what I think about this game as we get closer to it. I had considered picking Navy against Notre Dame, and I'm glad I didn't, because Notre Dame blew them out with all the turnovers. But I did think to myself, I was thinking of the service academies kind of as a combo there. Do you think one of the service academies could knock off Notre Dame this year with how well they play? And so I will keep that in consideration as we get closer to November 23rd. But that is 10-9-8. That's game number 7. Game number 6 is a banger, and this matters more if Pitt wins this week, but it's number 11 Clemson at number 18 Pitt on November 16th. This is going to matter for Clemson either way. This is Clemson's most difficult game remaining, and if Pitt beats SMU and Clemson keeps winning, and this is one-loss Clemson that only lost to Georgia and undefeated Pitt, holy moly. This becomes, even if it's not that, even if Pitt loses to SMU, if they're both one loss, this could be an ACC title game eliminator. This could be a playoff eliminator. Because again, do you think the ACC is going to get in 3? And if Miami has a pretty clear path to the ACC championship game, I think it's possible that the ACC championship game is going to be Miami against the team that emerges from the Pitt SMU Clemson thing, and the Pitt SMU and Pitt Clemson games are going to determine that. So this is hugely important, and go North. That is November 16th at Pitt, and there's a decent chance we'll be there for that too. We've been joking we need to get an apartment in Pittsburgh because Pitt's so good, and they matter so much. So let's see what happens there. The next one is 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. I actually numbered it on my sheet. Number 5, and I think this could be higher, is number 13 Indiana at number 4 Ohio State. This is November 23rd, second last weekend of the regular season in Ohio Stadium. If they both win out, now the thing I actually think, I don't think it's an eliminator. Now, if Ohio State loses to Penn State, it could be an eliminator for Ohio State. Then we would test. If Ohio State loses to Penn State and Indiana, and they've lost to the 3 best teams on their schedule, and now what's their best win? Is their best win Michigan if they go and win that game? Does 9-3 Ohio State get in? That would be a fascinating test for the committee. I had said theoretically, I think 9-3 Ohio State is almost always in, but that's because Ohio State almost always plays a non-conference game that really matters. They didn't this year. So then if the 3 good teams you play all beat you, what's your case other than the fact that you're Ohio State? Maybe this is too high because this is not an eliminator for Indiana. If Indiana handles its business in all its other games, which it will be favored to do, and Curtis Rourke should be back against Michigan State this week as the starting quarterback, Indiana can lose to Ohio State and still make the playoff. So this is, I think, highly competitive. I think it is 2 very good teams, and it is really exciting. It is not as much of a playoff eliminator as some of these other games. So then you could argue, well, maybe 5 is too high because maybe Clemson Pitt matters more because the loser's probably out. I don't think the Indiana Ohio State loser is out because the Big Ten is going to get at least 4. And you could even have a situation where these are teams 3 and 4. if you get a Penn State, Oregon Big Ten title game. And I think they'd both be safely in as long as neither of them have 3 losses. Game number 4 does matter. Number 7, Tennessee at number 2, Georgia on November 16th. I think this is the best chance for Georgia to lose in the remaining regular season because I don't think Ole Miss is going to get it done. That just would shake up so much. If Georgia takes a second loss and just because I think there's a decent number of people who at the moment are viewing the Bama thing, the Bama loss for Georgia as a bit of a fluke. Is Georgia better than Bama, but they lost to Bama? Yeah, they're probably better than Bama. They're ranked higher than Bama now. So if that's like they played a bad half and then had a bad play at the end that let Bama snatch that victory, and otherwise they handle their business, then I don't know if I can wear my Georgia hat anymore because like it's going to be hard to be ironic if the rest of the world is like Georgia's a steamroller and if they're backing that up, right? So like beating Mississippi State by 10, the 1-point win over Kentucky early in the year, to me is not backing that up. But if they steamroll Ole Miss on November 9th, steamroll Tennessee on November 16th, now what do you say? It's like, well, you'll still have Oregon or Penn State or Ohio State or Indiana or Iowa State or BYU or Kansas State or Pitt. You'll still have somebody in the North take their shot against Georgia in the playoff, but we might have to like chill out on the dog mentality until then because it's like, oh, Georgia's actually playing very well, even if their coach shoves people. So I don't know. Tennessee, like the Tennessee that played against Bama, I don't think is going to beat Georgia. Like Tennessee has to get its stuff together. Now its defense is really good. And I do think Georgia's offensive playmakers and Carson Beck are not as good as people think. So this does really matter, I think, in a lot of real ways. And also if Georgia thumps Tennessee and then Tennessee stumbles elsewhere, now maybe Tennessee's not a playoff team. So this one really does matter. It's number 4. Number 3 on my list is the game this week. It's Ohio State at Penn State. The winner of this is very much in contention for the Big Ten title game. And the loser now all of a sudden has a very difficult path because if it's the second Big Ten loss for Ohio State or it's a first Big Ten loss for Penn State, but now they lose the tiebreaker to Ohio State. And if Indiana and Oregon are still floating out there as undefeated teams, like it gets difficult, right? So it's very much like Indiana. I don't think it's a playoff eliminator because I still think you would have a very good path to the playoff if you win otherwise for both these teams. But my gosh, it's number 3 versus number 4. And Ohio State and Penn State have only played as 2 top 5 teams once before. So it's like a huge deal. So still high stakes on the idea of like whether you get a bye, whether you get a home playoff game in the first round, whether you're on the road in the first round, like really matters when it comes to your chances to winning the national titles. Like all of that is very real. Number 2, is a game that Dan Wetzel brought up when we did like the most important rivalry games. And I like was not there at the moment, but Texas A&M is the best of the frauds in the SEC. So Texas at Texas A&M on the last weekend of the regular season on November 30th. That's currently number 6, Texas, number 10, Texas A&M. This probably is winner into the SEC title game, loser not. Now, loser out of the playoff, if they both handle their business otherwise, no. But this is like if you're assuming Georgia takes one of the SEC title game spots, the other team is this, and then the loser of this becomes probably the third SEC team. So now you're more in the 7, 8, 9 range as a seed, as opposed to the 5 or 6 seed. And your path just gets harder. So it's really going to matter, and it's going to be venomous, and it's going to be a rivalry with high stakes, and so it deserves to be this high. And we have a lot of great games happening on the last weekend of the regular season, as we should. But you're allowed to watch this. This is peripheral vision. Hey, what's going on over there with Steve Sarkisian? Hey, Mike Elko, I see you. And then number 1, I don't think this is hyperbolic, but I don't know that a lot of other people would have this, because this game, this could be the difference between being the 4 seed and missing the playoff. So this is Iowa State and Kansas State. It's at Jack Trice Stadium in Ames, the last weekend of the regular season, Farmageddon. So this is why I think this is so huge and why it's number 1 on my list. If you think that nobody's going to get BYU, that BYU is going to handle its business against the schedule we already laid out of Utah, Kansas, Arizona State, Houston, if you don't think they're going to lose, then BYU's in. They're in the Big 12 title game. That means almost certainly, not almost certainly, if nothing else weird happens, this game will be for the other spot in the Big 12 title game. And then we're going to do our playoff picks on the Wednesday show. I think at the moment that my playoff pick is that the winner of this game beats BYU in the Big 12 title game. And that is not an indictment of BYU. That is an indication of how hard it is to go 13-0, and that BYU will not have played a super high quality opponent in a while. And if it's Kansas State, that'll be a revenge game for Kansas State. If it's Iowa State will not have played BYU. Now, Iowa State might also be trying to go undefeated. So that if that's two undefeated teams in the Big 12 title game, if it's Iowa State wins out, beats Kansas State in this game and wins out, and BYU wins out, the Big 12's getting in too. Because if it's undefeated in the Big 12 title game, the loser's getting in. But my point is, I think the winner of this game certainly has a chance to win the Big 12, and now you're the 3 or 4 seed. But if you lose, now you're viewed as no better than the third best Big 12 team, and is the Big 12 getting 3 in? That's the question. So that's why this is number 1 on my list, because whether it's fair or not, it might be a playoff eliminator. And there is not a game where the stakes are as stark as potential 3 or 4 seed versus out. So this is a monster. So I don't have Ohio State, Michigan on this list because Michigan's not ranked right now. These are the 10 games. I was like, I'm going to do a top 10. Let's see how many ranked matchups we have remaining. We had 10. So I just did those 10. I didn't look for like, oh, here's a team who's actually like the 31st best team, and they're playing a really important game against a So this is it. Have these on your calendar. I always suggest if you want to make a little laminated thing and put it in your wallet, put it in your purse, put it in your pocket, put it in like you have a fall jacket and you have a little zipper. You ever have the fall jacket with the zipper on the chest right here to store the most important things, most important remaining games in the college football playoff race? Why wouldn't you put that in your fall zipper? So keep these in mind because the race is on, baby. The race is on. And you know where it's really on? It's really on in the North. So we get it. We get it. The SEC mediocrity is mucking some things up a little bit, but we've got a bunch of really good Northern teams right in the thick of it. All right. When we come back, Dan Wetzel will be here. We will talk about the selection process and how they're going to decide who to put in the playoff. And then ahead, we still have Punt and Block of the Week from Bill Landis. We have Overrated Southern Team of the Week and also some other news happening in Northern college football. All of that next on Kings of the North. Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises joined by Dan Wetzel, as we are every Tuesday. Dan, how are you?
I am well, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm a little sweaty again. It's at 80 again in the Midwest in almost at Halloween time.
Beautiful. Best weather in the country.
It is.
It's in the Midwest.
It is. I was a very like northern kind of thing that the other day I walked. Do you have a convenience store that's like your convenience store, Dan, that you'd like to go to a couple times a week?
Of course.
Yeah. So I went into my convenience store and it was like 77, but they also had a rack of mittens, winter caps, and like ice picks for your windshield out. And I was like, this is a quintessentially northern/Midwestern thing where it is entirely appropriate to be ready to pick ice off your windshield, but you're also dripping sweat as you look at the mittens.
Got to stay prepared. Stay prepared. Head on a swivel. It'll happen at any moment.
Yeah. It
But
could
it
come.
ain't happen until November, so we're gold.
Yeah. Let's talk about the playoff committee. We are a week away from the first unveiling of the college football playoff selection committee rankings. There are 13 members of the committee this year, Dan. I just want to start with this. Like, do you like this? Like this process where they make a TV show out of it and they unveil things during the course of the year? Or would you prefer to just do it? And we understand why they do it. It's a TV show. But would you prefer, hey, just announce it at the end of the year and let everybody else figure it out? We have meaningless polls. Like, that's fine. What do you think of that part of the process?
Well, as someone who has a podcast, talks on podcasts, writes things, I'm all in favor of this show because it creates angst and anger and all sorts of stuff to write about. Easy, low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the college football playoff, though, I have said from the start, this TV show is a terrible idea if you're running this playoff because it undermines the credibility of your committee, which is already seen in a very skeptical manner. And the problem is coming out after what will be 10 weeks or whatever, 8-9 weeks, whatever next week will be.
Yeah.
To come out and say, oh, this is how it would look. And you go, yeah, but it doesn't really matter because these two teams play each other or whatever. And then have like, it's like looking at a half-baked cake, right? I think it'll be moist. Well, it might be, might not. This might have like a lot of things can happen here. It's just, it's pointless. If the playoff started this Saturday, this is what we would do. Well, it's not starting this Saturday.
Yeah.
So they do this to create speculation, but then they have to trot out their committee chair who has to explain stuff. And the problem is they explain, hey, first off, they rank all 25. That's dumb.
Yeah.
It's impossible. If you've ever done rankings, it's impossible to determine 23 and 24.
It actually makes more sense now than it did when it was just 4 that mattered to be ranking.
Yeah.
But now at least it's 12. It's like, oh, number 21 is not that far from the 11th spot. But I know what you're saying. I agree.
Right. Very hard. But then they sit there and go, well, why is this team 17th and this team's 20? And they have to, we like their game control. Right. And then 2 weeks later, they don't use game control in some other controversy, or they say, well, I mean, I've heard it all. Right. Turnover margin, I've heard. Yeah. Right. Injuries. The famous one was Ohio State with Cardell Jones getting to play as the third string quarterback. Look how good they are. Their third string quarterback scored all. Well, okay. First off, that gives an advantage to anyone who got to play their third string quarterback and show that. So if your quarterback, your first 2 string quarterbacks weren't injured, you didn't have a chance to show. Right. If you take these things to like a legal argument, these are stupid. And so all you do is undermine your credibility. There have been many years in the 4-team playoff where we got to the end and the 4 teams were obvious. And they should have gone down to Grapevine, Texas, and watched the games and had a couple cocktails and come on and said, here's your 4-team playoff. And I said, man, the committee's great. Instead, they had wrecked themselves PR-wise for 6 straight weeks. And so everybody hates the committee. So they have done enormous damage to their own process because the process has every rule, which means it has no rule.
Because I do think I don't mind an undercooked, half-baked, moist cake. But I think I'm like, oh, I can't wait. Oh, I'm glad I got a little taste of this. I can't wait to eat this cake when it's done. I think the problem is that some years they change out the recipe in the middle. And the whole time my favorite cake is the yellow cake with chocolate frosting. Isn't that a great cake? How great is yellow cake with chocolate frosting? Classic, come on, man. Dan.
You are a classic, man. You are a classic.
Oh, my God. Betty Crocker, let's go. Yep. And then you think like, ooh, it was a little soft, but I can't. And then you pull it out of the oven, and TCU is like, this is a German chocolate cake. This is no longer yellow cake. What have you done? I think the most harmful thing is that they try to explain their reasoning along the way, and then the only time it matters, the reasoning flips. And everything they said before, that if there was a way to have some consistency, I think there really could be value here because you could understand as a team, not that you can change your schedule and not that you're not trying your best anyway, but you would at least understand where you stood. But I do think sometimes you think you know where you stand and then you get to the Sunday when it matters and it's like, what? They did what? So
let me give you one example of that TCU, because that was that first year and they got the right call. Ohio State won the national title. I'm not saying they had the wrong call, but the TCU was ranked 3rd in the country. They beat Iowa State 55-3 and dropped to 6.
Right.
Now, if you just don't say they were number 3 before that, then it's not right. So you sit there if you're a TCU fan or player, go, wait, what were we? Well, Ohio State's 3rd string quarterback did really well against Wisconsin. Okay, well, what if we played our 3rd string? We might have still won 50. Like that's the problem. And through the years, they've killed their credibility for what is a rating play at this ESPN show, but it's not like 5 million people are tuning in.
No,
they just jam it between 2 college basketball games and they get a couple 100,000 more people. Like and they're like, we need this debate to spur up interest in college football.
Yeah.
I don't think you do.
Right.
I think this actually turns more people off. So I think it's a bad marketing plan for them because when they say everything is criteria, that means nothing is criteria.
Yeah.
No one knows what the criteria is.
The idea that it's like the unveiling of the playoff rankings for the number 2 sport in America.
Right.
Up next at halftime of DePaul versus Providence. And it's like, does this matter or does it not matter? Because I know what doesn't matter is DePaul Providence in November. So let's do we trust this group? Let's run through the group. I'm just going to do like a 5-minute bio on all 13 committee members. So if you could just let me finish this, we'll get back in like 65 minutes. Maybe make it 4 seconds each. There's 4 retired coaches on the committee this year. Chris Alt from Nevada, Jim Grobe from Ohio and Wake Forest, Gary Pinkel from Toledo and Missouri, and Mike Riley from Oregon State and Nebraska. There are 2 retired players, Will Shields from Nebraska, Randall McDaniel from Arizona State. There are 6 current ADs, Chet Gladchuk from Navy, Ward Manuel from Michigan, who's the new chair this year. By the way, putting a guy out there to talk about controversial stuff. Man, he's got some good experience. Connor Stallions and Jim Harbaugh.
They should have Connor Stallions on. He's more, Connor Stallions would figure it out, actually. It's pretty, that would actually be Connor Stallions would be good on this committee. He'd be like, well, I created an analytic program. I'd be like, you know what? That's what Connor Stallions is good at. Ward Manuel. So that's the wrong Michigan rep right there. Should be Connor.
We go to Brohio.
Not only did I watch the games, I watched them from a secret satellite, and I want Connor Stallions on that committee.
I secretly recorded every game.
Yeah, watched it at different angles.
Committee. I wanted the committee to have as much information as possible. Here is something out of my mom's pocket in the 3rd row at Iowa State, Cincinnati. Boy, look at this route from Jaden Higgins. Okay.
Can't say he wasn't good at it. That's what I'm saying. He was good at it. It was, not in the spirit or letter of the rules, but he was good at it.
I do think we'll talk about that in a second. I think they need to be more expansive with who's on the committee. Anyway, Mac Rhodes from Baylor, David Saylor from Miami of Ohio, Carla Williams from Virginia, Hunter Yurachek from Arkansas, and then the media member is Kelly Whiteside, formerly of USA Today. There are 7 old members and 6 members who are new this year. It's interesting. They're actually Pat Chun, the Washington State AD, was named to it initially. And then when he took the Washington job and then the Pac-12 exploded, they took him off and replaced him with a retired coach. So that's more retired. It's a decent balance. Mike Riley came on that way. 6 sitting ADs, 4 retired coaches, 2 retired players, and a media member. I think that's a decent group. I actually probably would take off all the sitting ADs because they should be running their athletic departments rather than trying to figure out who the 11 seed in the playoff should be. If I were the university president, I'm not sure I would let my AD do it because I would be like, shouldn't you be here figuring out NIL and how to fund the swimming team? Why are you going to Texas to drink wine and put your feet up and have a discussion about Kansas State versus Tennessee? What is this? I do think they should have an analytics person on there, like somebody who thinks about the sport differently. Now, again, I've done the mock exercise. Did you ever do the mock exercise?
No,
We
but
do
I'm
the mock committee
with it. Yeah.
So it's like they make a big deal. They have all these inside stats that they give to the people, but I don't know. So those stats do come up in the discussion. You're talking about game control and stuff like that. I don't think they have anybody in the room though who actually understands the stats. And to have a person there who's a voting member, whether it's a Bill Connolly type of person or somebody else who understands college football from that standpoint, I think would be very helpful. What do you think of this as a group, though, to have 13 people involved with the sport? Do you like it? Do you hate it that a committee exists? What is a better way to pick playoff teams if not this?
Okay, bunch to unpack here. Agree with some analytics. They bring in the coaches because then they can say they know football.
Right.
I certainly these guys know football, but I reject the notion because you could sit there if you had gone back at certain times and said, wait, this team's playing the spread. That's not real football, but it's successful and you're winning. Like, well, that's not how you play football. Well, winning.
Oh, for sure.
To me, this is a math problem, not I like their style of play more, or you don't understand how hard it is to prep a third string.
I wouldn't want to play those guys. I wouldn't want to play those guys.
What is this, right? Oh, I know that he knows the game. Well, is this really about the game? It's about I'm a believer in it's what you earn, not projecting forward. It is why, and I get that last year I thought, boy, I really hope Alabama plays Michigan in this semifinal because it'd be a much better game, and it was. But I said, now Florida State should be in because they did it. And you can't sit there and say, well, I don't like their second string quarterback.
Right.
That's not fair. That shouldn't be a criteria. But again, that's what they did. They just like, we don't like your second string quarterback. Well, let's see what he does. Like we've seen all sorts of guys come through and have
Cardale Jones,
right?
Yeah.
You don't know. So if he had a better game against Louisville, or that was a third string. The second was whatever. So there's all those things. I agree with you on the ADs. I don't know how you get on this. Like, why would you be on this? You're getting paid. These are incredibly difficult jobs, and yet they always have them. Also, you have to recuse yourself all the time. Like if you're the Michigan AD, and I don't want to pick a word manual because we've had the Ohio State AD, the Oklahoma AD, we've had the Clemson AD. You expect during your whatever term to be in the playoff mix every year. So why are you even there?
Fight for your team. Gene Smith, the Ohio State athletic director, cut his term short by a year. I think in part because he was in there in a year when Ohio State was in the playoff mix. And in recusing himself, he took the person out of the room that would have fought for Ohio State. Because if that had been the Nebraska AD or the Iowa AD or the Penn State AD, they would have stood up for their conference. And instead, you take that person out. And I think it's only 13 people. It's not 70. You take that voice out of the room. I think it really matters. As a practical matter, there is not an AD in the room this year that has a good team. Now, it's because Michigan fell off a cliff, but it's Navy. Actually, Navy could be
Navy could be in this thing.
But of all the ADs, they're the closest. Navy, Michigan, Baylor, Miami of Ohio, Virginia, and Arkansas. So there have been times that Oklahoma AD's been on this, the Ohio State AD. It's insane. And also you have to recuse yourself like if your kid gets a paycheck from any school. So like Chris Ault is recused from Nevada discussions and also UCLA. I'm not sure why, but I assume it's because there's a family member who's getting paid by UCLA, which is one of those things. Then you can't be on it. I almost think if you have any recusals, you shouldn't be on it at all because if you can't be on, so we agree with that, but they're never going to get away from because they don't want to give up that control to say there's no sitting ADs.
So here's the better system. Yeah, they want the sitting ADs want control, but I just don't know why. If you're a major AD, why would you even sign up?
I agree.
It should be one thing if it was one weekend and the rest of the time, maybe you met on Zoom and kind of ran through a few things every Tuesday, whatever. It's an hour meeting. You don't go through this whole dog and pony show, but you're sitting there getting paid. Some of these ADs are making $2 million a year and you're spending 2 days a week in grapevine arguing over who should be, is BYU.
And you're in charge of like watching. You have to watch all these games during the course of the year. You're running an athletic department, and you're like, "Oh man, I better sit down and crunch this SMU Pitt tape."
Right?
It's like, "Oh my soccer team is out of money."
This is the thing. SMU Pitt's a perfect example. we got to decide who's better, SMU or Pitt. And it's not this week they'll play. So but normally you'd be like, oh my God, I got to figure this out. It'll work out. They're going to play. Like only if we had a way to determine which is better, SMU and Pitt. So yeah, they waste enormous amounts of time, but that's their time. The proper way to do this, okay, which will never be done, is a single transparent computer formula. And everybody knows.
Robots.
I know.
Oh, robots.
I know they'll never do it, but that is the way. If everyone knows the system and then you do it, you take out, everyone knows what you got to do to win. And this is how it is. Now, they'll never do that. We have to have a committee. For the most part, this is not a big deal. They act like by making it seem so important, by having to have 7 meetings or whatever they do.
Yeah.
And have a committee chairman and all this stuff. They actually, this is pretty simple. Okay. First off, 5 of them are going to get sorted out with auto bids.
Yep.
5 of the others are going to be, should someone be the 8 seed or the 9? Someone's got to direct some traffic. It'll come down to 2 teams at the end. For the most part, anybody can do this, which is why everyone has an opinion. It's not that tricky. I understand but like they ignored almost every credit in bailing on FSU last year. They ignored 10 years of precedent by throwing FSU out.
Right.
I was fine with it as a fan because, again, I wanted to watch Alabama, Michigan, and I got treated. If Michigan, maybe they just beat FSU by 20 points. It's a boring game. That doesn't help anyone. But they were undefeated champions. Right. They were 13-0. Like, what are we doing? And so this is the problem. If you have one now in the hockey program, the hockey playoffs, which I understand some
look at you.
The North.
Who else is going to come on here and cite hockey playoffs? I love
it. I love college hockey, and it is getting better and better because they've got some new rules that the top talent is more talent's going to come to NCAA. It's increasingly than junior hockey. But college hockey is getting better. It's gotten dramatically better in the last 10 years. This is a Northern show, so I can talk a little hockey.
Absolutely.
But it will get dramatically better over the next 5. I mean, there are superstars coming to college hockey now that were previously, playing for the Moose Jaw, whatever. And now you're going to get to watch them at these schools. So hockey's got an unbelievable system on everything. NHL, college hockey, it is a tremendous system. But they have a thing called pairwise. Now, it is a computer formula that the NCAA promotes. I don't know if they run it. I think they run it. It essentially mimics what the committee will do. And so there is still a committee, but generally speaking, whatever pairwise says at the end is going to be the thing. So you go into that final weekends, and there's college hockey bubble. It's out there. And guys are like, hey, we win this game, especially if we win 3-1, we're going to get in because pairwise is going to march us up. And it works. It just works. Now, it's not absolute, like maybe the number. So they can't give up. They can't give up control. These are college administrators. Yeah. They love control. They love rules. They love all that. Someone's got to be flying the plane. We're not autonomous.
But really, the whole point of a jury of this is they want to reserve the right to keep a team like Florida State out because a computer doesn't know that the starting quarterback got hurt, but the people do. And that's the only reason you want that control, because you can see things a computer can't see and you want to react to it. But there were a lot of us, and you're making the point, that when people reacted to that reality, we were mad about it. When a robot would just have looked at the records and the strength of schedule and said, these are the teams that should be in.
Yeah, I got it. I mean, I totally understand it. And I was not outraged, but I was like, that really shouldn't. I don't think that should be a criteria. It's a team. It's a team game. So anyway, in pairwise. So it's funny because in the same NCAA, right? The same. Many of these are the same athletic departments. Ward Manuel's got a hockey team. Ohio State's got a hockey team. Like all the Big Ten, a bunch of the ACC schools in the North, a lot of hockey teams out there. And Miami, Ohio's got a hockey team, right? There's committee members on there that are like, yeah, we're good with pairwise in college hockey, which is that door down the hall there. But in football, hell no, can't do it. So it's kind of weird.
But the NCAA is not in charge of the football. NCAA is in charge of every other championship, but not the football. We talk about We get mad about like the idea that college athletic departments are going to outsource some of this stuff or bring in private equity. They've outsourced the most important playoff and the most important sport forever to either the bowl system or then the BCS and now the playoff committee, where because they don't want to do it. So the thing about this is, I think to your point, they still do a thing. They call it, there's someone that does simulated BCS standings because all the computer formulas still exist. The simulated BCS standings this week, and they just use the AP and the coaches polls for the human element, are basically exactly what the polls are. It's Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, Ohio State, Miami, Texas, Tennessee, BYU, Notre Dame, Iowa State, Texas A&M, Clemson, Indiana. So like it's very similar. Because here's the thing, Dan, that in the end, we should never have put it in the hands of voters who are groggy at 1 o'clock in the morning and forced to get their vote in by noon and don't answer to anybody and are not paid to do it and maybe want to try, but maybe don't want to try. So the human element previously was the dumbest, sleepiest humans. So it's like, can we get better humans than that? But then the computer systems, like you said, they outsourced the computer systems. They were like, there's like some computer scientist guy who's a professor at Caltech who has a system, and we think he inputs the data the right way.
Yeah, we have no idea.
But maybe his 11-year-old helped him this week, and the 11-year-old put Iowa State when they meant to put Iowa, and nobody ever checked it. So I didn't like the computer aspect when it was that. When it was amateurs on the outside that they were bringing in and trusting with no backup. So at least this, I like a room and a conversation better than humans sitting in their different places and just putting a ballot down. I'd rather have a conversation. But I do think there's a way to bring in a smarter computer element than what they did before. But it's one of these things, again, why do they outsource that? They don't have the money to create their own computer system that they pay somebody to trust, that you're talking about with hockey. I think this system with the committee is the best it's ever been, but it's because I didn't trust anything else. But I don't think it's the best it could be.
Yeah. So overall, I trust the committee because I think most of these decisions are no brainers, and then someone's got to make the call. The other ones are extremely, they're razor thin. And you got to have somebody just go, hey, that's what we're doing. All right. We can't do the NFL style because the schedules are too disparate. The BCS was a mess. And as you know, I wrote, a while ago, really 2 editions of Death to the BCS. We went through all of it. The voters were classic. Like the final vote one year, like 3 guys forgot to put their ballots in.
Yeah.
Like, hello, like why do you have a ballot if you're not even going to vote on the final one? It doesn't technically make that big of a difference. There was there was another one when Urban Meyer was coaching Utah. It was that great. See, they beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah.
They had Alex Smith. This was a great team, and they were 6th in the polls in the BCS rankings. And the day after, Josh Peter works at USA Today now, and we started calling voters to say, what did you think of Utah? Do you wish you'd change? And like the first 3 people we reached said, I had never watched Utah this season. I was really impressed. And it's like, okay, so if you're a voter on a national championship, I get it. Utah is not Notre Dame or Alabama or whatever, but like, wouldn't you be like, hey man, I got this responsibility. Maybe I'll check out this unbeaten team with the projected number 1 pick. Out west, I'll find the cable. They're like, I hadn't even known anything about Utah. They're great. Like,
no. So it's better than that. So this is better than that.
Better than that. And then the computers, one of them was like bringing in recruiting rankings, which on a loaners, past records, which again is predictive often, but like, should Michigan be getting points this year because they were good last year?
Especially not in the modern world anymore. Right. It's not predictive at all.
This is better. This is better. This is the best system they're going to get unless somebody's willing to go with something like pairwise, which again still has that human control. But I don't believe anyone would have the courage to hand it over to a computer. It's like saying we're going to have an autonomous. They can do an autonomous plane, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Nobody wants to. Do you want to get on it?
No. I don't want robots doing anything. I don't trust robots at all.
They basically can do it. They could have a guy down,
Yeah.
but you're like, no, I'd rather have this guy, even though he might
Yeah.
have been at the hotel bar flirting with the
Yeah.
flight attendants last night. I'd rather have him in there. So like, it's just a, this is the best we're going to get. For the most part, it's going to be fine. There's going to be some, there's going to be yelling and screaming and all that, but
Yeah.
like, come up with a better solution. Everyone, I'll say it's a computer. Everyone will go, the heck no. All right, well, what's the better solution? It isn't, we need more coaches, or we need to expand the committee to 28 people, or whatever the heck it is. They could have 5. They could have 3.
I do think so. So one of the things I want to get to quickly before we let you go is, do you think there's pressure on the committee because of the SEC and the Big Ten looming over this, and that if they don't get enough teams in, they're going to take their ball and go home? Do you think the committee's going to feel pressure? Because I do think, I ran through at the beginning of the show all the teams that I think are in the playoff mix. I absolutely think the Big 12 is positioned to get 2. And depending how things go, I think there could be 3 Big 12 teams that are as deserving as any 3 SEC teams. But the idea that the playoff is going to be like 3 from the Big 12, 5 from the Big 10, 3 from, it's not realistic to think that they're only going to get 3 from the SEC. Well, do you think that'll be felt in the room, that Greg Sankey better get his teams, or they're not going to do this anymore?
Well, I think the SEC and Big Ten have pretty much intimated that. Let's just say.
I think they have too.
This better go well.
Right, said it. Yeah.
Right. They said it better go well. Well, let me tell you what. If it will, here's what will happen. 12 teams will be in the playoff. We'll play 11 games, and someone will be the national champion. I think that's well. That's basically like the flight will take off, it will land, and everyone will get off and be where they're supposed to be. So what is it better go well? Better go well for what? They're going to pick 12 teams. If it would be not well if they got to 10 and we're like, we're done. Like, okay, now we have a mess. Or we pick 14 teams. Well, there's only 12 spots. Like, they're going to do it. So
absolutely.
They're already we need 4 automatic bids for each one.
Yep.
I think most years the Big Ten and the SEC are going to get 8 to 9 spots anyway in a 12 team, and 8 to 10 maybe some years. I don't know. I mean, they could get.
Could you imagine
right? 8 to 9 is 9.
No, I think that's agreed. I think like 8.5 is the over under most years in a 12,
so
especially when we get to 14.
Control this where it's like we have to, because you can look at the Big Ten and in the way it could break down, you could have 3 great teams. If Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon all go undefeated, that means Ohio State's got 3 losses and no good wins.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 9-3 Ohio State is
play it
a
out.
huge test taste.
Right.
Huge
and
test
Illinois
taste.
and Illinois falls down, and it's like all of a sudden you're like, well, who's the 4th team? Well, we got to put Ohio State in. Well, what did they do this year? Well, they're Ohio State. They're in the Big Ten. Okay, but if they literally played nobody in the non-con and none of their other, it's not their fault Michigan's not any good, but that's how it works. But if they were to lose to Penn State and Indiana, and we've had this already, the classic of like all 3 could be undefeated and only 2 get in the Big Ten title game. Like it's a mess. But I hate the idea of more automatic bids. Compete, you'll get the lion's share of these spots because you have the best teams and the strongest schedule. But hey, if the Big 12 can put 3 up there, then they deserve to have 3 in there.
What about a world where in a 14-team playoff, and as people know, the 14-team playoff is coming, where if they just decided the SEC gets 4, the Big 10 gets 4, the ACC gets 2, the Big 12 gets 2, there's a threshold for Notre Dame to get in, the G5 gets 1. So if that could be your whole playoff, that's 14 teams. If Notre Dame doesn't hit the threshold, now there's a wild card spot, and a committee picks that. Where then you say to the Big Ten, send your 4. I don't like, you decide. You decide who you want your 4 to be. Don't yell at us. Like, would that make any sense?
Yeah. Yes, it'll be fine.
Put it on somebody else. Put it on yourself.
What if there's 5 SEC teams? Like, I don't like. I just don't like the arbitrary nature of it. The only automatic bid I really care about. I like the automatic bid for all the conferences, because if like everybody says the Big 12 is so much more exciting this year. Yeah, because you don't know what's going to happen, and they're playing for something. That UNLV Boise game last week was exciting because the Mountain West race, and wait till we get to the end. It'll be a big deal. People will be like, all right, this team's going to be the 12 seed, or could they be an 11 or whatever? But I just don't like the arbitrary nature. Is it like the hill to die on or scream about. No, it's
Yeah.
at the end of the day, this is going to be really fun. It's going to be really good. But do I like that? It's like, well, you're guaranteed for. What if I only have 3 good teams? I mean, it can happen.
I prefer this, but I think depending how mad they get, I mean, I do think there is a way of like, fine, this is probably, as we already said, this is probably what it's going to be anyway. So then you figure it out. Tell us who your 4 are, and on Selection Sunday, send us the 4 teams that you think should be in from your conference, and then we'll seed everybody compared to everybody else.
Yeah, I always say this too. One thing that's like, can we just let the 12-team playoff play out for a few years?
No, well, we can't because we're already going to 14 in 2 years.
I know.
So no.
I mean, well, they haven't 100%. They're not 100% in. They're going to do it, but
they're going to do it.
Everyone is in such a damn rush. Like, how about we see? Because let me say this: so far, okay, what are we? 9 weeks into the season?
Yeah.
Things have happened that you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Like, so far, so good, right?
Yeah.
So far, like, we have not had these major games lose interest or importance. You haven't had. No one was sitting in Ohio Stadium on Saturday going, we could still lose this game to Nebraska.
Absolutely.
Like, no big deal. That isn't happening. I don't think we've lost one thing, and we've gained other things. Now, are there going to, and we're going to get a November with like 50 elimination games, and it's going to be absolutely wild the last 2 weeks of the season as seasons are done or not. It's so far so good, and you go, but maybe 12 is just perfect. Let's play this out for a couple of years. Then if we need to expand, because it's just like, instead it's like expand. Hey, let's have 18 teams. Why don't we have an 18-team count? Well, what if 3 teams go undefeated? Yeah, we didn't think of that. Okay. Right. It was like, well, let's see. Let's just calm down. I know there's like this chase for revenue, but like everything's so fast. I'd like to, so far, this has been great. I think this is the most interesting season I've ever covered. And we're not even in November yet.
The thing that I'm most worried about for next Tuesday is the mediocrity in the SEC, because even I fed into it a little bit when I did my list of teams that are in the mix. I had 8 SEC teams, but like the bottom 5 of those are frauds. LSU, Alabama, Missouri, Ole Miss, and then maybe Tennessee also, like that. But they're all like floating in this 2-loss, 3-loss, lose to each other, don't really win anything that matters world. And I'm nervous about that for Tuesday night, that if they look at the muck, because the SEC at the top is not as strong as it usually is, but if somehow that's a bonus for the SEC, like, oh, look at all these 9-3 SEC teams, let's put 6 of them in, I'm going to go crazy. And I'm a little bit worried about that. That actual mediocrity in the SEC will somehow benefit them. That's the number one thing I want to alert for.
Well, this is the other thing about when they start. Now, they say every week we tear up the thing and we start anew.
Yeah.
Maybe. But at the end of the year, we have 4 ACC versus SEC games at the end. Kentucky, Louisville, South Carolina, Clemson, Georgia Tech, Georgia, and Florida State. Okay?
Okay.
That weekend, however it breaks down, now I could predict it right now what I think, but however that breaks down, it's probably going to go 2-2. But let's say let's say the ACC wins them all, or let's say the SEC wins them all. Let's say Florida State bows out. Hey, we're going to beat Florida, right? That's a significant data point. And if I want that. This is the part about the almost all baked. Are you ready to move a team down based on that? And you might sit there and go, well, that doesn't really matter. But you go, wait a minute. Like the ACC last year had, what they go, 6-3. They had a winning record by a number of games over the SEC. And yet Alabama got in over Florida State. And so that's why I just don't like this. You know, the season's got to go. And when in terms of ACC, SEC debate, you don't know who's stronger until they play those 4 games.
Interesting. No, I do think it's going to be a great November. And I'm not preemptively anxious about the playoff release, but I'm curious and I'm on alert. And I do think as much as things change, the only one that matters is the last one, but the second most important one is the first one, because it gives you a peek into their thinking. And I'm curious if they come out, if Indiana beats Michigan State this week and still is floating 10-12 in the AP poll, and the committee comes out and has Indiana 5th, that's going to really, really matter.
Where would you put them? Where would you put them? They have won every game by 14 or more, and they haven't trailed.
We do our own rankings. I had them 4th this week.
I mean,
so I
they
said
haven't played a great schedule, but they're killing everybody. So,
if Indiana was wearing Ohio State's jerseys, they'd be number 1.
Absolutely.
So, like, with the way they've dominated and controlled both sides of the ball and the coaching they're getting and the talent level, for real, they'd be number 1. So the idea that they're whatever they are, 13th, I hope we see that in a world where, like, LSU, until losing last week, was ahead of all these undefeated Northern teams. Like, I'm hopeful that the committee does right by BYU and Iowa State and Indiana and Pitt, but I'm not sure they will. But I think they'll do better than the pollsters do. So we'll see. All right. He's Dan Wetzel. I keep him too long every week. He's such a gentleman. We appreciate you being here, Dan. We'll see you next Tuesday. And we'll be right back with Overrated Southern Team, Punt Block of the Week, and some Northern college football news. Next on Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises back on Kings of the North. Unless something goes wrong, I'll tease you. Ari Wasserman's going to join us tomorrow. And Bill Landis, Ari, and I will do Heisman picks and playoff predictions, and we're going to bet on it. And so we're really going to do, like, this is what we think it will be at the end of the year. That requires you to think how games are going to go, but it's not what we would do today. It's not what we would do in our hearts. It's what we would do for, like, a Red Lobster gift card or whatever we decide to bet. So I think you will get a very good view into what we think is going to happen in November based off those rankings. Bill and I also on the Wednesday show will break down Michigan, Oregon. We'll have a big game breakdown on that, and we are going to do the Ohio State, Penn State big game breakdown and all the other things, and do some stuff on SMU Pitt on the Thursday show. But we want to make sure we give Oregon, Michigan, that is not to the level of Ohio State, Penn State in terms of competitiveness, but, you know, like, if defending national champ against number 1, and it's a Northern, like, that's something in the North. So we want to make sure we give enough attention to that. So look for that on the Wednesday show. Regular previews with the big game breakdown of Ohio State, Penn State on the Thursday show. Overrated Southern Team of the Week. We do it every Tuesday. There are so many to choose from. This is less impactful, but I would just like to point out, like, the ridiculousness of it. And it's the fact that Missouri is still ranked. Missouri is number 25 in the AP poll. Missouri is 6-2. These are Missouri's wins. 51-0 over Murray State, 38-0 over Buffalo, 30-27 over Vanderbilt, which I guess is now a good win because Vanderbilt is the next great team. 45-3 over UMass, 21-17 over fraudulent Auburn, and then 27-21 over Boston College when Boston College was ranked. That was at Missouri, so it's a home game. It was close. And then, like, Boston College is not actually great. They're okay. But there's not a win there that gets your attention, really, for Missouri. And their losses are 41-10 to Texas A&M and 34-0 to Alabama, and they're ranked. So they played 2 SEC teams with a pulse who are actually even like, are we sure Bama's that good? 34-0 last week. They're still ranked. And I don't know why. So this is it. It doesn't matter because Missouri is not going to make the playoff. I had to keep them in the list of, like, possible playoff teams because they only have 2 losses and they're in the SEC and people are crazy. But I think even if they run the table, they're not going to make it. But I just like why they are 20. I get it. At this point of the year, it can be hard to find teams to rank, but, like, rank Navy. Navy lost 1 game to Notre Dame. Like, I don't like what has Missouri done? So anyway, and they're only 1 spot below Illinois, who has, I think, significantly better wins than Missouri. So anyway, it's just it's just what still permeates things. So we will continue to fight against it. And like that's your number 25 team in the country. It either says something about our inability to like find good teams, or maybe that there aren't good teams, but that is not a team that should be ranked in any poll put together by man, beast, or robot. All right, let's get to our punt and block of the week. It's your Tuesday dose of Bill Landis, which I know you always look forward to. I do as well. Let's see what Landis picked this week.
Bill Landis back here with your punt and block of the week on Kings of the North. We're going to start with the punt this week, and we're going to Iowa and Hawkeyes punter Reese Dakin. Folks, Iowa found another one. His name is Reese Dakin. He's a freshman punter from Australia. He is what they look like. He punted 8 times in this game for the Hawkeyes. 4 of them were downed inside the 10-yard line, including this one, little coffin corner style. Nice angle kind of line, drives it down there into the corner. Probably looking to get a bounce maybe inside the 5, but this one goes out of bounds at the 6. That's fine. Iowa got a safety on the very next play. Field position working for the Hawkeyes, and you know that Kirk Ferentz likes it. Keep an eye on Reese Dakin. He's going to be one of the best punters in the country over the next couple of years. Moving now to the block of the week. You know we like to put some shine on offensive linemen here on punt and block of the week, but we're not going to do that this week. We do like to shout out players who are non-linemen when they do make a nice play, and we got one this week from West Virginia tight end Traylon Davis. West Virginia scored 3 times on 4th down in its win against Arizona this past weekend. Here's one of them. It's a touchdown run for Jaheim White. Watch the block from tight end Traylon Davis. He's the first one pulling across your screen, hits the corner into the safety. It's a 2-for-1 for West Virginia. Football is a simple game. Get your big players on their little players, and good things are bound to happen. It happens here for West Virginia. Great block from Traylon Davis. That'll do it for this week's block and punt of the week here on Kings of the North. I'm Bill Landis. Thanks for checking it out. We'll catch you next week with more blocks and more punts on KOTN.
That's like a Landis billiards trick shot. Block the corner. I'm going to call it. I'm going to hit the corner into the safety, bank that off, and make it in the side pocket. All right. A little bit of news around Northern college football to catch everybody up on. The news today on Tuesday is Jordan Leslie, the West Virginia defensive coordinator, fired by Neil Brown. And I do believe we saw that there's maybe some billboards going up around West Virginia in the Morgantown area about firing Neil Brown. The 2 Northern coaches, I think, on the hottest seats, Neil Brown at West Virginia and Ryan Walters at Purdue, have now both fired the coordinator in charge of the thing they are not experts on. So Ryan Walters, a defensive head coach, fired his offensive coordinator a couple of weeks ago. Neil Brown, an offensive head coach, fires his defensive coordinator at West Virginia. West Virginia had secondary problems all year. They got a bunch of guys in the portal that I think were going to be pretty good. In the Brian Fremo rankings that we reference a lot, West Virginia is number 51 overall. They are 18th in offense and 91st in defense. And then the adjusted EPA per play rankings, which is, again, how efficient and successful you are on a down-to-down basis. West Virginia is 57th in offense and 124th in defense. So clearly, the defense is the bigger problem. It is not the only problem for West Virginia, but it is the bigger problem. And I think this is, I don't know which way to view this when you have a head coach firing coordinators. I do think it can be smart and decisive. Now, frankly, when you do it in November, it's like almost November. How decisive was it? But it can be like you doing right by your team. You making a difficult decision to get rid of a guy that you chose, you hired. A lot of times you have a personal relationship with, because coaches love to hire their friends. And you put that aside and say, this is not best for the team. I'm going to do this. But there's a part of me that also thinks if you are a head coach, once you start firing assistants during the year, all bets are off when it comes to your future. Because I do think we as media and as college football fans can be a scooch bit glib about firing people. These are humans. These are families. These are real life things. Now they're also millionaires. So it's like, I have fired a millionaire. Oh, cry me a river. I'm more there. Like, this is the profession that you chose. We all know the deal. And all these guys, they grind and they work their way up, and they're, making copies and getting coffee and cutting film into 4:00 in the morning at these early jobs. And then they work their way up. And they start making a little bit more money. And then you hit the peak. If you're a head coach in the FBS, you're at the peak. You're making money. So, like, how bad is it? So I actually I don't think that in the end, but every now and then I pull myself back. It's like, well, it is a person. But I do think you're on alert. So I don't know that this means that you're going to get fired because, for instance, like Jim Harbaugh, that one off season, I guess after the COVID year, changed his whole coaching staff. And it's like, well, is this a desperation move to save your job, or is it smart head coaching to do what's right by your program? And it completely changed Michigan. So, okay, that worked. And sometimes making a change can be like, wow, that coordinator change was just what the program needed. But I don't know if I think that for West Virginia. So we've been talking about it. Neil Brown, I do think is certainly on the hot seat, which again is I don't love the phrase, but I do think we'll do a hot seat show a couple weeks from now and to just talk about possible openings in college football. But anyway, there's a defensive coordinator change at West Virginia. This happened the other day, but Jack Tuttle, who had started at quarterback for Michigan in the Illinois game, retired from football. He said he had his 5th concussion, and that was in part why Davis Warren started for Michigan on Saturday in its win over Michigan State, because Jack Tuttle was done. He joins Grayson McCall, the North Carolina State quarterback, who also retired from football in the middle of this year because of injury issues. Jack Tuttle, 25 years old, 7th-year player. Again, the story, he's a quarterback in the San Diego area. He's on a high school team with Chris Olave. That's how Ohio State found Chris Olave. Ryan Day went to watch Jack Tuttle and was like, oh, who's that guy that Jack Tuttle's throwing to? And it was Chris Olave. And so high school teammates, Jack Tuttle, you're Utah, Indiana, Michigan, was part of a national championship team, has been around the block 7 years. He's 25 years old. That's a nice, healthy college football career. So best of luck to Jack Tuttle. He did have off-season elbow surgery on his UCL. That's a ulnar collateral ligament. And he said he didn't ever fully recover from it, and that there was still maybe factoring into his level of play. So always unfortunate when that happens. Best of luck to Jack Tuttle. Pitt and Eli Holstein. There's a lot of quarterback stuff happening in the North right now. As we talked about, because the news came out during the Monday show, Drew Aller, according to James Franklin, is going to be probably a game time decision for Penn State, starting quarterback there. Eli Holstein was hurt late in the Syracuse game, and I mentioned this during the Pitt game, and Pat Narduzzi just did not guarantee that he's going to play. So these are 2 undefeated Northern teams who might not have their starting quarterbacks against ranked opponents on Saturday. So this is a huge thing to watch. Another quarterback thing is what's happening at Iowa. Cade McNamara has been the starter. Brendan Sullivan, we talked about this on the Monday show, took over for him in the second half against Northwestern. Brendan Sullivan, the former Northwestern quarterback, had been the backup first year at Iowa, gives a run threat to the offense that just does not exist with Cade McNamara. It's just stylistic. Brendan Sullivan is not, I think, a substantially better thrower than Cade McNamara, but if they're both going to not throw it that effectively, you may as well put in the guy who's got legs. So Brendan Sullivan this week is listed number 1 on the depth chart, and Cade McNamara is not listed on the depth chart. As we record this, we don't have news from Kirk Ferentz about that. That will come out on Tuesday, but our producer, Mike, says that there's an Iowa offensive lineman who said that McNamara was voted a captain for this week, but he's not on the depth chart. So there could be we don't know what that means, why he's not there at all, that he's not listed as number 2. So, but the bottom line is it feels like Brendan Sullivan is going to now be the starting quarterback for Iowa. And I think that will give Iowa a better chance moving forward. Now, Iowa already has 3 losses. If they had not lost to Michigan State, I think they would be in the Illinois category of a lurker. They would have a chance to be a 10-2 lurker with losses to Iowa State and Ohio State, but a third loss, you're not going to get it done. So that doesn't mean that your season is over, but it could be one of those situations where maybe if Kirk Ferentz makes a change a little bit earlier, maybe they have a chance, because they did compete in the second half. They got within 1 score against Michigan State before Michigan State marched down the field on that defense. So something to watch there. We probably need to do a recap of Northern quarterbacks this season. It really has been kind of a crazy year. And I guess maybe not unusual, but certainly a lot has happened, from Cam Rising at Utah to the Michigan uncertainty at quarterback all year to now Eli Holstein and Drew Aller being questionable in gigantic games. Like, this is Curtis Rourke for Indiana missing a game, but probably back this week for another undefeated team. Like, this is a lot that is happening in Northern college football. And the last thing I just wanted to mention is the Big Ten is looking into the post-game Michigan State-Michigan fight. And it's a reminder like that these guys just did this 2 years ago, the fight in the tunnel. Criminal charges for 7 Michigan State players after that game. Like, it's not funny. $100,000 fine for Michigan State. There is something in that rivalry. Jonathan Smith, the first-year Michigan State head coach, said, quote, he thinks there's genuine dislike in that series, which maybe is like you then end up getting in a scrum with each other over genuine dislike. You can find things on the internet. There are views from above from like Big Ten Network cameras and stuff that like there are things happening in the scrum on the field at the end of the game that look like they could lead maybe to some suspensions or other penalties for some of the people and the teams involved there. So I think to Jonathan Smith's credit and Sharon Moore's credit, like neither of them said it was okay. They both said this is not how they want their teams to conduct their business. And I know it can be a fine line. It always, I think teams, I'm actually not calling out Ohio State. I am not calling out Michigan State and Michigan in these circumstances at all. But I do think, for instance, again, with my time covering Ohio State, I think people remember, I guess it was a 2013 game where Marcus Hall, an Ohio State offensive lineman, got ejected from the game over like a fight and flipped the double bird to the crowd after the game. And then it's like, he was disciplined for that. He didn't start the next week. And it was like, oh, this is a terrible thing. And then like Ohio State will put it in highlight packages about the Ohio State Michigan game. And every highlight package of about an Ohio State Michigan game has a fight, right? It's the David Boston fight, right? That they like, and so, there is part of this, like, especially these young guys, right? That it's, you don't like, this is not how you should behave. But then it's like, if there is a fight, let's make sure we put it in a highlight package. So I get it. It's football. It's a violent sport. And it's very difficult sometimes to be like, make sure you're violent the exact right way. We want you to be violent this way, but not violent that way. And I certainly don't mean off the field out in the community, but like, it's still on a football field. It's with other football players. Yes, it's after the game, but it can be hard sometimes. So that's not to excuse anything, but I just will be on alert for Michigan State and or Michigan to get in trouble from the Big Ten or any of their players to get in trouble. And then for there to be a highlight package on ESPN or Fox or the Big Ten Network a year from now that shows the fight. And it's like, look at this rivalry. And it's like, okay, maybe that's just what we're doing here. This is the sport we've chosen to love. And that's just the reality of that. All right. We'll end it there. Big show Wednesday, Michigan, Oregon, playoff picks and Heisman picks with a gift card on the line. We will get back to doing what you're watching, what you're eating, what you're thinking on the Wednesday show. And then again, it is a lighter schedule, 12 Northern games this week. That's it, because 10 of our teams are off. So we'll cover all the other games on the Thursday show. And then I will say we're figuring this out. We may be doing some kind of live rewatch during the games on Saturday, particularly focused around Ohio State, Penn State at noon and Michigan, Oregon State at 3:30, where we have to get it, figured out. But maybe Landis and I will just be chilling and on our YouTube channel. And so if you want to have the noon games on or the 3:30 games on, and have us on a second screen on your laptop or something, or on your iPad or your phone, and we'll just be chopping it up. Like, we can't do play-by-play, or we'll get arrested and dragged off to ESPN and Fox jail. But we can like just sort of talk about football while the games are being played. So we think we might want to do that if we can figure it out. So we'll have an answer for you by the Thursday show of whether we're actually going to do that. But maybe now I said it out loud, maybe we have to, so you can hold us to it. Thanks, as always, to Dan Wetzel for joining us every Tuesday. Thanks to our producer, Mike Yorstowski, for making us look good and sound good. Thanks to you guys for being here. Give us a thumb, click the bell so you get the notifications, subscribe, and tell a friend about Kings of the North. For now, I am Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.